Hello, I'm Dylan.
And I'm Keon.
And this is Triple Play, that podcast where we are speed. Because this week we watched Cars.
Written by Dan Fogelman, John Lasseter, Joe Ranft, Keel Murray, Phil Loren, Jorgen Klubian, Ben Queen, Brad Lewis, Mike Rich, Brian Fee, Eyal Padel, and Jonathan E. Stewart.
Directed by John Lasseter, Brian Fee, and, I guess I should say co-directed also by Joe Ranft and Brad Lewis.
And released in 2006, 2011, and 2017.
Almost consistent 5 to 6 year release cycle between these movies, so we're due for another one in 2023-ish.
Cars 2 was originally supposed to come out in 2012, but they pushed it ahead for whatever reason, probably because it was one of their biggest movies.
Yeah. And even though it was critically and...
Not commercially,
but
just critically
panned.
Yeah.
It made tons of money. So
how many times have we seen these movies? We should just lead with that, or else we'll forget like we inevitably have done in the past.
Check out Inevitable Podcast.
Yeah. 0. I surprisingly had not seen any of these.
I'm shocked. Truly shocked.
Yep.
I saw Cars 1 in theaters when it came out.
Yeah, well, we were, like, when Cars 1 came out, we were in the Cars 1 demographic. We were, like, smack dab in that.
I was in 5th grade, I think.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And then, so I've seen Cars 1, I want to say 3 or 4 times. Cars 2 I only seen once before this, and Cars 3 I'd also seen once, precisely like 1 week before or 2 weeks before we watched this. Because nice. I didn't realize we were going to watch this so soon, and I hadn't seen Cars 3, and I wanted something to watch, so I watched Cars 3.
Nice.
So it was a little weird seeing it again, like 2 weeks later.
Well, just kind of jumping into the production here, just like Cars had been on my radar since 2006, but I hadn't watched it until 2020, Cars had been an idea, circulating about within Pixar and specifically between John Lasseter and I think Joe Ranft since at least 1998, since at least the time they were wrapping
Toy Story 2, I guess.
Toy Story 2 / A Bug's Life.
/ A Bug's Life, yeah.
And I actually read, I think that Toy Story 2 kind of is it wasn't the sole factor, but it was a contributing factor as to why Cars took until 2006 to be made.
Because they realized they didn't have the tech yet.
Well, also because they realized Toy Story could bring them a lot of revenue, I guess. But yeah, we'll get into the tech, because the tech that was necessary to make these movies, well, at least Cars 1. After that they advanced the tech because they wanted to.
After that,
because they
once you have the tech invented, you just iterate. It's like how they invented that hair tech for Brave, and then it was in Monsters University.
Well, we'll get into some of the tech for Cars 2 and 3, and perhaps why it was actually a mistake, in my opinion. Because in my opinion, Cars 1 and 2 actually are visually better than Cars 3. And I think the tech has something to do with that.
I disagree, and having watched Cars 3 so close to each other back-to-back twice, starting to realize Cars 3 might be my favorite of all three, but anyway, might like it better than Cars 1. Just saying. So...
Anyway, yeah. So the genesis of this movie...
Well, the genesis of the actual story was a script by... was it Joe Ranft?
Yeah,
someone wrote a script about a little yellow car. An electric car.
Well, it was originally, I believe it was Joe Ranft, and it originally had this sort of environmental message of, the car, the main character car was an electric car in this world of non-electric cars.
With 3 wheels.
Didn't read that part, but all right.
Yeah, part of the reason why this little yellow car was ostracized in the script, because it was like a little ugly duckling type story, was because not only because he was electric, but also he only had 3 wheels.
Yeah, so the sort of environmental thing behind this movie was then used in WALL-E. Well, that's just me kind of speculating.
One of my best favorite Pixar movies.
I didn't actually see anything that was like, yeah, we took out this environmental stuff and put it in WALL-E, but I would assume that you know,
They also shoved it
that
into
was the
Cars
case.
2. Kind of.
Kind of, yeah.
Cars 2 is a pretty muddled message, especially when you compare it to the message of Cars 1.
Maybe the message is that, like, in a world with so much information and misinformation, like, who even knows what's right and what's wrong?
Maybe.
And why does Mater seem to learn absolutely no lesson when every single Pixar movie is about, like, learning some sort of lesson?
I think he does learn a lesson. That lesson is it's okay
That
to
he
be
was
an
right.
asshole as
He was-
long as you're funny about it.
Well, there's a specific line that production designer on Cars 2 said during the making, or with regard to the making of Cars 2, that really shined a light on why Mater is the way he is in Cars 2. And we'll get there. But before we get there, we have to discuss John Lasseter himself.
Yeah, so apparently he had been burning himself out. Burning the candle at both ends, so to speak, at Pixar. Producing all the movies, directing Toy Story and Toy Story 2, I think.
And I thought he directed A Bug's Life.
I think
And
that as well.
I think it was... Yeah, did he direct Toy Story 2? I don't remember.
Or maybe he did Bug's Life and not Toy Story 2. Well, he was directing a lot of movies. He was burning himself out.
Right.
And eventually his wife was like, you're going to miss the kids growing up. Blink and they'll be in college. And Lasseter was like, you know what? You're right. Let's go on an RV trip.
So they did.
They rented an RV. They went driving. They just went driving.
Well, they had 3 goals I read with this trip. 1 was see the Pacific Ocean, 2 was see the Atlantic Ocean, and 3 was keep off interstates as much as possible. So definitely keep to more back roads and state highways.
Well, see the Pacific Ocean wouldn't have been that hard since Pixar is in Emeryville, which is in the Bay Area, which is like right there by the bay.
Doesn't John Lasseter, I think I read John Lasseter lives in Northern California, so I assume he spends much of his time traveling between Northern and Southern California, but...
Well, not anymore. Since he got outed at Pixar about 2 years ago now.
Yeah.
And then immediately hired by Fox, who I guess just ignored all of those accusations.
Yeah, all the claims against him. So they go on this trip and apparently really enjoy it. And that's the thing. John Lasseter has gone on record as being a huge fan of cars, automobiles, you might say, for his entire life. Really liked just cars and everything about them.
Well, that's why he was such a big proponent of getting this movie made, because he loves cars. Cars are like his favorite thing in the universe, besides Hawaiian shirts and Pixar. But apparently the story evolved from the yellow car due to this trip, because Lasseter thought that it would be a good vehicle to tell the story about, slowing down once in a while in life and just taking in the fresh air and smelling the daisies.
Right. So I'm not sure. I might be muddling the timeline of the making of this movie by telling this story right now, but I'm not sure when this actually happened. So after Lasseter's road trip with his family, after Cars went into production, Lasseter and a few other key people from Cars, the production team from Cars 1, actually contacted this Route 66 historian, this Route 66 expert named Michael Wallace, and they themselves went on this journey, specifically on Route 66, but probably elsewhere as well, across the American Southwest and stuff. And there's a single story that was basically just straight up incorporated into the movie. They met this Native American guy.
Yeah.
And hold on, I wrote down his name. So this is from a production designer on the movie, Bob Pauly. He's the one who related this story. They met this Native American guy who told them this story about how the state government or whatever blew up his homeland to make way for a highway.
Yeah, I don't know if he used the exact words "blow up," but
yeah, or like there was like demolished or something. I don't know, but that I think for them was like, okay, this is going in the movie. This is a movie. It's now, and I think this journey across or through or on Route 66 was what sort of colored the movie with like this nostalgia for like the American Southwest of like 50 years ago type thing of like, this is a place that's past its prime. But it's somehow still kicking out here, and these are the landscapes we're kind of going for. And that's something Cars 2 and 3 are actually missing for me, is like the setting of Cars 1 is so much more fleshed out and just better in every way.
Well, I didn't know that Route 66 until researching for this movie, that Route 66 actually goes all the way up to Chicago. It's not just the Southwest.
Yeah, no, it's that's why it's famous, is like it's, you take it from the Pacific Ocean to the East Coast, almost Midwest, I guess.
They apparently took to get the colors right, they took like soil samples on the journey. They were taking like copious amounts of notes. Michael Wallace apparently they went out in white Cadillacs, and Michael Wallace was giving them the tour via walkie-talkie.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you mentioned the samples, because one of the things that I think Lasseter was really the one who was the biggest proponent of with the making of Cars was the I don't want to say realism, but like, yeah, let's just say it, just realism of what they were kind of trying to do.
Yeah, John Lasseter wanted it to feel very true to life, which is a little weird because they're cars in a Cars universe.
Well, he didn't want the cars to feel like toy cars or like just cars made out of clay. He wanted them to feel like cars. And that's something I think he said when he, maybe saw some initial, renders or like concept animations for the movie or whatever, is like, these cars don't look like the metallic, heavy things that they actually are.
I think the main thing he said was that he wanted them to have weight, that they had to feel like cars, because cars are heavy. And the animators basically were like, this is going to really restrict what we can do with this movie. Because like when you, I don't remember, somebody said this, one of the animators said this, like when you make them metal, when you make them like stiff like actual cars, you basically limit all of the motion that they can do. Like you're very restricted on what the cars can actually do.
Right. Which is, I think, why, from an animation perspective, my sort of question about this movie ever since it came out was like, why are the eyes on the windshield and not the headlights like you would see in most cartoon cars? But I think that...
They have a legitimate explanation for this.
I think, it actually helped in the long run. I think whether this was intentional or not, something Lasseter said was that from the very beginning, he was dead set on like the eyes have to be the windshields no matter what. But I think that actually helped in the long run, making the cars expressive, because despite the fact that they were actually able to animate the cars very well and created some new tech and stuff to do that, which we'll get into. Despite that, I think having the eyes be that big and that much of a focus of these designs really helped with the expressions of the cars.
Yeah, well, the exact quote that I think Lasseter said was that, like, when you put the eyes in the headlights, it makes them look like snakes, and you didn't want that. So, and then when I think about it, I'm like, yeah, he's actually right. We see one car with eyes in the headlights in Cars 2, and it was horrifying.
Yeah, yeah, it is a little, it's a little scary, actually.
No. And I think like one of the animators for Cars 3 was like, yeah, so we were trying to like figure out what we could do with these cars, because he hadn't worked on Cars 1, so he's like, we're trying to figure out what to do with these. And when you really think about it, the cars are basically just heads. All you've got is a head. You could make like weak analogs between the tires and like arms and legs, but really it's you're just basically animating a head, and that's all you've got to work with.
Well, one thing that actually also was a challenge for some of the animators was that, and again, I think this was a directive specifically from John Lasseter, like the cars have to be grounded at all times like real cars. Mm-hmm. Can't have them flying all over the place and doing anything where they're not grounded, as in not stuck to the floor, quote unquote, because it's
except
just
when
an
lightning goes
movie.
soaring through the sky in the race and Cars 1.
So they created some new technology that would like map the cars to the landscape.
Right.
I don't know too much about how this works, obviously, but I think someone from Cars 1 was like, this is the first time that Pixar characters had any sense of their surroundings. So like, for example, with Toy Story 1, you'd have those characters and you'd animate them in the 3D environment, but it's not as if the characters were necessarily interacting with the environment in the sense that like there's some sort of connection between, as there like in Cars, there's a connection between the cars and being on the ground, just like there is in the real world. Mm-hmm. Whereas in previous Pixar movies, that wasn't necessarily the case.
I can imagine it being the case for like A Bug's Life, but I don't know. Just like because the ants have to be tiny, and then they have the whole ant society that gets built, but they have to be restrained to the ground. They can't fly.
Well, no, I mean like in terms of technology, right? There's nothing keeping the bugs on the ground.
I guess, except biology.
No, I mean
But I
I'm
guess
looking
that's
at
actually
this
like
from
the whole point of that movie is that they like make that bird so they can fly to scare away the grasshoppers. Yeah, you're right.
Don't we see
Also,
flying,
female ants
yeah,
can
I was
female
going to
ants
say,
can
like,
fly.
we see some flying ants in A Bug's Life.
Yeah, the females.
But I'm specifically talking about, like, and again, I don't know too much about how this works, but, like, specifically in terms of, like, the tech, the cars in Cars are stuck on the ground. And that helped, probably with, like, different, sort of driving over different elevations and landscapes, right? It's not just all flat, so you would want to have the cars, be realistic and stuff.
Well, I think that helped too for making the cars feel heavy because you got to keep them stuck to the ground. So.
Right. I want to say part of this is just me kind of guessing, but I want to say part of this is John Lasseter's background as an animator at Disney. I think he was an animator at Disney. Mm-hmm. I know he worked at Disney. I don't know in what capacity. But a big thing about Disney animation is that it uses, as much as possible, tries to use real-world physics. Not that there's physics in 2D animated cartoons, but well, there is, but it's not like a technical thing. It's just like however it's drawn is how it's drawn. But Disney is known for like having those realistic sort of, or trying to mimic the real world in terms of their animations.
Well, John Lasseter spent a lot of time while doing Cars talking to, I wish I wrote his name down now, but I think the final surviving member of like the original 7 animators at Disney, who was like 92 at the time. Was apparently good friends with John Lasseter and like had animated Cars for Disney before. And apparently Lasseter spent a lot of time talking with him, trying to get the cars right for this movie.
Right.
So there was obviously a lot of care put into designing the cars.
Well, it was almost, I think, Toy Story all over again, because with Toy Story, they had this like single point of failure. Like, if the toys suck, the movie sucks. And this one, they're like, if the cars suck, the movie sucks.
Well, I think it's just indicative as well of the like attention to detail that John Lasseter is putting into these movies as director. Because I think both the first Toy Story and the first Cars movie were both directed by John Lasseter. I'm like pretty confident he directed the first Toy Story.
Yeah, he did. And
in both of these movies, he was like very adamant, not only that the story be good, but also that the animation like is the best it could possibly be, and that the production design is the best it could possibly be, with all these tiny little details, getting all the reflections right on the cars so they look metallic. So gloss looks like gloss is another thing Lasseter was saying, metal got to look like metal, gloss has got to be gloss.
Right, and they actually, Pixar started using new different techniques. That they didn't invent any of these techniques, but I think that was their first time kind of really doing more than maybe just dipping their toes into them. Like they use ray tracing to get a lot of the to get a lot of the reflections correct on the cars, because they realized these cars are going to be racing down tracks, and there's going to be lights all over the place, and there's going to need to be their surfaces are at least somewhat reflective.
Mm-hmm. Ray tracing is a very computationally heavy task, which is partially why this movie took so long to render. I read that it took 17 hours to render a single frame of this movie at a time. And like a couple seconds would take multiple days, but ray tracing, you literally trace the ray of light from its source, off its reflection to the camera. You have to trace the entire path of the light. Normally you would do something like reflections with like luminosity masks, where you basically fake it, kind of. Ray tracing is like the more, I guess, realistic way to do it, because it's almost how light actually works, but there's still like obviously simplifications made. the fact that we're only now 12 to 14 years after Cars came out, getting to the point where ray tracing is like possibly maybe able to be introduced into like home video games, just shows how far ahead of the time this technology was at Pixar.
Well, I mean, I don't know that is necessarily a good comparison, because there's like a world of difference between creating an animated movie and creating like
the computational power required to do ray tracing in both cases is like pretty similar. In fact, it's probably easier at Pixar because you don't have to do it on the fly.
Exactly, that's the thing. Like, you don't have to render anything like in real time, which is why it's more which is why it was possible back then and is like not really now, even.
Yeah.
But they also tried to just, going along with the reflective surfaces of the cars, they also wanted to get a lot of the car materials exactly right. Mm-hmm. Mimic car paint and, the coats of the cars and all of that in their 3D world.
Right. In this horrific universe they've created.
Yeah, it is kind of horrifying when you really think about it.
I have so many questions, like where do the cars come from? Where do baby cars come from? We see young children cars. Where do they come from?
How did the cars create their society? It looks to be a human created society, but the cars don't even have opposable thumbs. How did all of this come to be?
Well, in Cars 2, we see them like they can attach welders to their rims, so I assume that leads us into some sort of potential theory here where they can attach things to their rims.
What's the lifespan of a car? Like, are cars just immortal? And if they don't, like, if they're well maintained, like, what do they die of old age?
Doc dies. How did Doc die? Was it like a heart attack? Do they have hearts?
Murder? There's actually something someone said. I think I wrote it down. It was production designer Bill Cohn, who I think worked on all 3 Cars movies, said something along the lines of, humans can see their own forms in nature, so cars can too. And that's why that's why so many of the natural like landscapes and just objects in the Cars world, that's why they decided to make them look like cars.
But so many things confuse me about the Cars world, because there are like countries named the same as real human countries, like Italy, right? Like Italy exists. We know Italy exists. Japan, London, England, these all exist.
I have some stuff to say about all of that.
But then there's like Radiator Springs, Carburetor County, the land of New Rerendia, which is a country they made up for the movie that's car-based. Paris exists.
Well, it's obviously an alternate, world, right? So that doesn't really set off any red flags in my head.
To me, it does, because it's like, did these cars go through the same like history as us? I mean, in Planes 2, there's a World War II vet, which implies not only that there's a Cars World War II, but a Cars Holocaust and a Cars Hitler.
Yeah, it's like a parallel universe where many things are very similar to ours.
Was there a Cars Civil War? A Cars Trail of Tears?
Maybe
Cars.
Maybe Cars
Raceway of Tears.
Maybe Cars is taking place way in the future, and they're all stuck in like a time loop.
Oh no.
Or maybe it's way in the past and we're actually repeating the time loop of Cars.
There's a Cars Pope. Like, is there Cars religion?
That's what Cars 4 should be about, like religious conflict between the cars.
The Cars Pope drives around in a Pope-mobile, which...
Wait, he drives around in another car?
Did you miss that in Cars 2?
When kind of zoned out in a lot of Cars too.
When they're in Italy, we see the Pope car riding around in a Pope-mobile, which is just another car with like, I mean, I guess it's like how Lightning drives around in Mack the truck, but there's so many questions to be asked here.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Are there disabled cars?
While we're on the topic, I just want to mention this, because I was going to mention it later anyways, like the Cars universe compared to all other Pixar movie universes that I haven't seen all Pixar movies, but the ones that I've seen, the Cars universe is like the least well thought out of all of them.
I think it's both the most well thought out and the least well thought out, because I think they put so much, going back to like the Route 66 stuff, they put so much care into making this landscape like realistic and how things move with the land, and they really wanted to replicate the American Southwest. But I think that thinking out is what's causing us to be like, have all these questions. Because think about Bug's life. Bug society is like, if you think about it, it's just as weird as Car society. But the Bug society they don't live in like America in Radiator Springs. Well, but they don't tell us that.
Yeah.
We see like
I know
the
what you
Bug
mean.
City.
Like, yeah.
So it's like, it's very fictional and removed from real life.
Right.
And I think Cars 1 is like, I think Cars 1 is actually fine on this because it's I think every location in Cars 1 is not like a real place. Like they have Radiator Springs. I guess they have Los Angeles, so not really. But then like Cars 2 is when it starts to get really wild because it starts blending the fictional world with the real one, which is I think where all the questions arise. So I think it's not that it's like
questions in Cars 1 as well.
Well, yeah, but I think like a predominant amount of them for me start to arise when you introduce like London, England, Japan, Tokyo, Italy, Rome. When you introduce so many real life locations, recognizable real life locations, that's when it starts to.
Yeah, it's like, how do they build the Eiffel Tower? Like, how does
it starts to like enter this almost uncanny valley of like. It looks too much like the real world to be believable as a fictional world almost, but anyway.
Well, I don't know. Maybe it's just that like I think these are some of the weakest Pixar movies that they've ever made. So, and again, I haven't seen all of them, so.
Which ones haven't you seen, just out of curiosity?
Well, it's easier to tell you which ones I have seen. So I've seen...
We've seen Cars and Toy Story.
Yeah, all of Cars, all of Toy Story, both Monsters, Inc. and Monsters University, Finding Nemo and Finding Dory, WALL-E.
You seen Up?
Yeah, Up.
Good Dinosaur?
No, I think that's it. I think that's all I've seen.
You haven't seen Bug's Life?
Yeah, I have seen A Bug's Life.
Okay.
I think that's it.
Coco?
No.
Coco's really good.
None of the
Incredibles?
Yeah, I've seen Incredibles.
1 and 2?
No, just 1.
Oh. It definitely would have been quicker to list the ones you hadn't seen then.
Well,
You've seen most of them.
Well, I don't know the names of the ones that I haven't seen. And like in looking back, like in retrospect, like I don't even really enjoy to a great extent any of these movies.
You've seen most of them, I'll tell you that. I've seen all of them. Cars 3 was the last one I hadn't seen until I saw it right before watching it for this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I've said it before, I'll say it again here. I really have no love for Pixar 3D animation or the Pixar style of storytelling type thing.
Wow,
really
controversial
no love
statement.
For that whatsoever.
The views of Keon do not represent the views of the podcast. Pixar is near and dear to my heart. By which I mean I basically grew up on their movies, so I guess I'm like biased, but whatever.
So, let's talk about Mater for a little bit, because we have to at some point, with all the difficulties some of the animators had on animating the cars and making them full of expression, full of life, while also making them look like cars, Mater was sort of the easiest to do. Probably, I think, this was actually said by someone on the team. His different parts, like his little hook thing, I don't know what you call it.
Tow cable.
And just all the little extra parts of him that the other cars didn't have made it a lot easier to give him expression, kind of give him life. Mm-hmm. And they really liked that about him. And he became their favorite character, the favorite character of the production team, really, in general.
Well, he was definitely John Lasseter's favorite character.
Yeah. Well, I think
talk
also...
about in terms of Cars 2.
Yeah. Lasseter has actually said, this is a verbatim quote, "More than any other character we've created at Pixar, I'm probably proudest of Mater."
Well, I can see that from an animation standpoint.
I can even see it from just an overall standpoint with Cars 1. I didn't really dislike Mater in Cars 1 whatsoever.
No, he serves his purpose very well in Cars 1, which is the comedic relief to Lightning McQueen, who's just to stick up his tailpipe, arrogant race car.
It's really with Cars 2 that we get some more of Mater that perhaps we should.
Which is why he's probably almost non-existent in Cars 3.
So just a last tidbit I have about the animation before we get into like some of the casting and release stuff. One thing that I didn't even notice while watching this movie, and one thing that the cinematographers, I guess, on the team really were, I think, proud of, is that you get shots in Cars 1 that you would never get in a real, with like recording a real race. You can get shots of like the cars an inch away from the camera. Mm-hmm. There's like no way you would get that, like just shots you would never be able to get in like real life.
Right.
They were able to do, obviously, because it's animated. And I didn't even notice that while watching the movie.
Because it's so seamlessly integrated.
But yeah, I didn't really have any more about like the animation or production of that.
No, I think we covered everything I had, at least for Cars 1 anyway.
In terms of was it casting? No, I think it's sort of typical like Pixar. Like these are pretty fairly well known actors. A lot of them are pretty big. Owen Wilson as Lightning McQueen.
Yeah.
Paul Newman as Doc.
Well, Paul Newman, they specifically wanted Paul Newman because he's actually a racing fan. So he was like already in this world, and apparently he said yes without even reading the script. They just asked him if he wanted to play a 1957 Hudson Hornet in a Pixar movie, and he's like, it's a Pixar movie, and I'm playing a car, and it's about racing. That's all I needed to know to say yes. Apparently
this is his last role ever.
Yeah. As far as I'm aware, because he passes away, I think, shortly after the making of a release of this movie.
Yeah. We have Larry the Cable Guy as Mater. I don't really know too much about Larry the Cable Guy. He's like a comedian, but has his roots as like a cable guy.
I guess. I don't know.
Or is that just his whole shtick is like, I'm a cable guy, but not really?
Do I look like I'm steeped in Larry the Cable Guy lore?
No idea.
I know that Michael Wallace, who was their Route 66 expert, plays Sheriff in the movie.
Huh. Yeah, and I mean, unlike you typically see with a live action movie, there wasn't like too much drama with the casting or recording of these voices.
Right, but there was actually like some care taken in casting who was what, like Paul Newman, who's a racing fan,
right,
as Doc, and Bonnie Hunt. They actually put some thought into like how they wanted Sally to act, and found like an actress who they thought would be able to bring that to life as a car.
And even with Larry the Cable Guy, he was on board because he was like, yeah, I sort of have these roots in like a small town, kind of like Mater type thing. So. Mm-hmm.
I forgot to mention because I did want to mention this, that Sergeant Fillmore, I think, were like the only characters carried over from the script about the little yellow car that's electric. Apparently that was like the one thing that Lasseter thought in that script could really be carried over to the final movie. Huh. And the original names were Fillmore and Sarge, so... And they make it into the movie.
Huh. Well,
every time I hear Fillmore's name, I just think of President Millard Fillmore. And then I just remember that there's a city named Fillmore in the county of Millard, so that the address is Millard Fillmore. Or maybe it's the other way around. Anyway.
Fillard Millmore.
Cars 1 was a big success.
They released the movie.
Global phenomenon. Merchandising giant. They still sell Cars merch. In fact, Cars merch has never gone out of style since the movie came out.
No. And that's, I mean, I've said this before and I'll say it again, like, when you're in this business of making these kids movies and making animated movies, like, the corporate side of this is that you're always going to be a puppet on the strings of, like, is this going to sell toys or not type thing.
Well,
like 99% of the time, that's the case.
When you have a license to print money. I don't know. A lot of people gave Pixar flack for doing a lot of sequels, but I mean, the current announced slate is like all original films. And when they announced all the original films coming up, they basically came out and they're like, yeah, part of the reason why we do sequels is because we need the money to fund all the original movies we want to make.
Well,
because we're not sure those are going to make money, so we need the money to be able to make them beforehand.
Well, actually, I forgot to say this, but let's just jump back a little bit in time. John Lasseter specifically requested, I think I wrote his name down, but maybe not, the composer for this movie.
Thomas Newman.
Right. Was, I think, the same one from Toy Story.
Yes, he is.
And I guess was friends with Lasseter. Lasseter liked his style because we sort of get, again, the sort of pseudo, like, country style soundtrack that Toy Story had to some extent.
Kind of makes a little more sense here because
Yeah.
it's the Southwest.
Yeah. Toy Story was like, okay, like, no. But I mean, from what I read, like Lasseter went on and on and on about this guy's ability and how he's like an amazing like composer, amazing musician.
Actually, sorry, go ahead. I just wanted to check now because I know Randy Newman did Toy Story, and I can't remember now if Thomas or Randy did Cars. And Thomas Newman's his brother. I'm just gonna check.
Just check it.
Oops. Yeah, no, it is Randy Newman. Just wanted to check that. Randy Newman. Well, I did say Thomas Newman. Randy Newman, who did the score for Toy Story and Cars as well.
Yeah. But I mean, I just don't see it. Like, there's nothing special to me whatsoever.
Yeah, it's not...
I couldn't hum a track from Cars right now. Like, I couldn't do it.
I could hum Real Gone by Sheryl Crow, which isn't like... It's not any incidental music. It blends into the background. I think it serves its purpose.
I mean, it's not like Duck You Sucker where you're like watching the movie and you're like, why is it like this? But anyway, yeah, the movie came out, huge hit commercially and critically, and was the last Pixar movie before they were bought by Disney.
Yeah, it was the one during this whole like time where they had this distribution deal through Disney, but then it was like falling apart, and then Disney ends up buying Pixar. We went over this more in our Toy Story episode because it affects the development of Toy Story 3 a lot more than it does like any of the Cars movies. So check that episode out for more details on that.
Well, as soon as this came out and was a huge hit, they were like, sweet, let's make a Cars 2.
Well, I think from what I remember is that John Lasseter was one of the biggest pushes for Cars 2 because he just loved Cars so much and loved Mater so much. He's like, I want to do Cars 2. And this was, I think, like the first Pixar sequel since Toy Story 2.
Yeah, it was. So the driving idea behind this movie is what would Mater do? And this it
that's already, yeah.
It reminded me of kind of what we assumed or thought they did with the Minions in Despicable Me 3 is like first decide what you want the Minions to do and what wacky and wild situations you want them to be a part of, and then create a movie around that. And it seems as if the same mentality went into this.
Well, so much like Toy Story 2 and 3, a lot of ideas that were on the cutting room floor for Cars 1 end up making it into Cars 2, for example. The whole idea of the character of Finn McMissile being a British secret agent, kind of the genesis of this movie actually comes from a sequence cut from Cars where Mater is watching a television show, and it's a spy television show featuring Finn McMissile as the titular character. And the idea for this whole spy kind of movie stems from that seed kind of in Cars 1.
Right, and that's sort of all these different ideas of like Mater being in all these different scenarios and the spy thing all sort of come together and result in this, I guess, script they come up with where Mater is traveling around the world, multiple different locations, multiple different racetracks, I guess, because he's following McQueen. And so I read something about this is that they, in order to kind of achieve that, they created multiple color scripts. I didn't know what a color script was before I looked it up for this, but apparently it's like a guiding idea in the concept art stages of like what colors the movie is going to like leverage to a large extent. And for a movie like Cars 1, where it's mostly just one location, you would have a single color script, and that would kind of decide what the movie is going to look like color-wise. But for this movie, since there were so many different locations, they had multiple color scripts, a different one for every location. And they didn't actually come out and say this, but from what I was getting from what I read, this is actually not common, I guess, to have multiple color scripts. But they did for Cars 2.
Well, because they had so many locations in this movie.
Yeah.
And that's one of the other things I think was a guiding focus of Cars 2 as well. I seem to remember Lasseter saying something along those lines that he wanted to, that part of in the germinating process for the ideas of Cars 2 was he was thinking like, what would Tokyo look like in the Cars universe? What would Paris look like in the Cars universe?
Turns exactly the same as this
Pretty
universe.
much. But like, it almost feels like they came up with all these cool ideas and like formed a script around it. Like you said, what wacky situations can we get Mater into? Like, what cool locations can we see in the Cars universe, and force the script to fit around it. Another thing that got cut from Cars 1 that makes into Cars 2 that I want to mention just before I forget, on the topic of locations, is going back to Radiator Springs at the end of the movie to hold the Radiator Springs Grand Prix, or the Grand Prix. That was the original conceived ending for Cars 1 because they wanted it to end with Lightning trying to rejuvenate the town and get it back on the map in some way.
Which they did, but they just didn't do it in that way.
Yeah, they did it in a different way. They felt the Radiator Springs race was kind of contrived in the first movie, but I think it works in the end of the second movie. And so that's another idea that gets recycled into Cars 2.
Well, I remember while we were watching Cars 2, Mater's like insensitivity and ignorance towards other cultures outside of his own was something that we like made fun of and noticed while we were watching the movie. And weirdly enough, here's a quote from a production designer on Cars 2, Harley Jessup, about portraying other cultures in the movie. The driving force, or the driving idea behind portraying these other cultures, was to caricature them. And she says, quote, "By caricaturing, I think of it as celebrating," unquote.
I'm making a weird face right now.
Yeah, so that just like so much of like the thing of like what would Mater do, and then this quote of like let's caricature these other cultures, like so much of that I realized contributed to all the stuff like that I thought was just dumb, dumb or just bad or weird or unlikable about Cars 2.
I think part of the caricaturization, though, is inherent in like they have to recreate these cultures, but now in like a car-centric universe, which was very easy to do for something like Route 66 or racing, because those are both already very car-centric ideas. Route 66, going on the drive, going from the west coast to most of the way to the east coast on this slow, meandering drive. Like, that's all very rooted in the Cars universe. But then you get to something like, you go to like a small town in Italy where we meet Luigi's parents, and like this is a small town in Italy where like cars were probably only introduced probably later than most other places, let's say, and cars are required to be very small because the roads are tiny.
Yeah.
So it's not like this place was built around cars, and then you have to try and convert that somehow into the Cars universe. And like, what's the easiest way to do that? Probably just to caricature everything.
Yeah. I mean, the way they went about it all, though, is just like, it's not interesting, it's not entertaining, it's not good. It's just flat out terrible. I do think Cars 2 is a flat out terrible movie.
I have a soft spot for it because I really enjoyed it the first time I saw it. I was quite young. I saw it in theaters as well. But I will admit that it is not a good movie in my, it's not like a great movie, but I have fun with it, so.
I guess. So, I mean, on some level, you have to like it if you're...
Yeah, I mean, No, I agree with that.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to come out here and be like, Cars 2 is an underrated masterpiece or something. I'll freely admit it's not. Most of my favorite bits of Cars 2 are the ones that don't involve Mater, so...
Yeah. Which I guess can kind of lead us into Cars 3 in a way, because, after this, Cars 2 was one of the first Pixar movies that had a very negative reception. Obviously, it made a lot of money, both in box office and in, toy sales and merchandise sales in general.
Right.
But it was really the first Pixar movie, I think, that had a overwhelmingly negative critical consensus.
I wouldn't say overwhelmingly negative. I think most review aggregation sites, which are the easiest way to get a sense of the general flow of the reviews, put it at pretty mixed. 5 out of 10 is usually like mixed. 5 out of 10 is not. It's because of this whole, we've talked about this multiple times on this show, how like, because 90...
It's like 7 out of 10 is the average.
Yeah, because 7 out of 10 is like assumed to be at the average. Anything below that is bad. But like 5 out of 10 means it's like it's mixed reviews, basically.
Yeah. Well, I mean, 5 out of 10 is, perfectly in the middle of the scale. Perfectly, I would say 5 out of 10 is mixed, right? Like you
Yeah,
have the
that's
people
what I
saying
would
giving
say.
it, like you have one person giving it a 10, and you have one person giving it a 1, and then
Yeah.
it's 5 out of 10.
Before we move on to Cars 3, though, I do want to talk about the music in Cars 2 just briefly, because Randy Newman doesn't come back for Cars 2. Michael Giacchino composes for Cars 2, and I'm not 100% sure why. I think it was a mix of scheduling conflicts, and also just Giacchino was, I think, more used to writing these spy scores. I think John Lasseter said from the outset that they wanted this to be a spy movie, just set in the Cars universe.
Right.
And Michael Giacchino had done a very James Bond-esque score for The Incredibles, which is one of my favorite scores of his. And so he's back for this one. And I find the music in Cars 2 to be better than Cars 1 and 3. But
It's just whatever to me overall in all 3 movies.
then Randy Newman returns for Cars 3. So
One thing I do want to say about the release here is that Cars 2 was actually translated into 45 different languages, and that's obviously due to the massive worldwide success of Cars 1.
right.
But that's a huge task, and I think that I don't know, on average how many languages most animated movies or most Pixar / Disney movies
Probably
are translated
not
into,
45.
but it's probably not 45.
Yeah, there's even a character that's like localized to be the character of Jeff Gorvette. He says like, "Hey, Lightning," the first time they meet in Tokyo, I guess. That character is like localized to be a character from whatever country the version of the movie is. So like in the German version,
Wow.
he's like a German car, and in the Brazilian version, he's the Brazilian
Wait,
car.
so in all these other languages, is Radiator Springs like in different countries? Like is German Radiator Springs in Germany?
I don't know.
Then there would be like a German Los Angeles too.
I don't know.
Cars multiverse is more complex than we thought.
Is it though? Anyway, yeah. So then Cars 3. There was, I couldn't find anything to back this up officially, but there seemed to be some sort of heavy internal backlash to having Mater be the focus of 2, because in 3 he's like almost non-present.
Well, I think it was both internal and external. So when Cars 2 came out, a big thing that people noted about the movie is that like it focuses heavily on Mater and kind of sucks because of that. So perhaps internally they're like, all right, like we gotta, scale back on this Mater stuff.
Yeah, there's I think, in my opinion, an awesome movie in Cars 2 if you cut Mater and just focus the movie on Finn McMissile and just go hard into the spy angle.
Well, John Lasseter actually said about Cars 3 that I think he was doing a little damage control here. He said that with Cars 2 we took this in the direction of like portraying Mater and stuff, and now we really want to get back to the McQueen story. We realized that was where it all was.
Right, John. We realized. Yeah, John. I think
they were
3,
just chasing a paycheck with that Mater stuff in Cars 2.
Possibly. I think Cars 3 is the final movie that John Lasseter works on in an official capacity at Pixar before he actually does get outed.
Yeah, well, it was 2017, and I didn't really keep up with too much of this stuff, but I do remember like him, the accusations or whatever and stuff like that, which was all around that time. So
Right.
makes sense. And obviously, these movies are in production years before they come out.
So, Cars 3 is also Brian Fee's first time directing. And I read an extensive article where he's like, there's so many moving parts I didn't realize I'd have to keep track of as a director.
Yeah.
I've already mentioned the animator who was like, we had to work within the bounds that we had. A lot of the storyboard artists and just concept artists for Cars 3 were like, yeah, so we had, tons of cars we had to design for Cars 3, like more than we had done before in such a short amount of time. They were like, and they were talking about how it was actually tricky to do because all the race cars needed to have the same wheelbase. So you were like very restricted on the size that you could work in to design all the race cars. But then they were talking about like the Crazy Eights sequence, and apparently that was the most difficult sequence in the entire movie to do, just because there's so much chaos, but also because the designers really liked it because they could do whatever the hell they wanted with the cars in that scene. They didn't have to conform to these rules. Like, Jackson Storm had to be the same size as Lightning McQueen, even though he's a different design. Like, he had to look like he could be on the racetrack. and fit into this mold almost. Whereas with the Crazy 8 sequence, there was no set design that they could go with. So they just, apparently, for all the cars, like on the racetrack, all the other cars in the movie, they went through like multiple design processes, fitting them down, getting them right, multiple artwork drawings, concept drawings, rough animations before they nailed it down. Apparently for the Crazy 8 sequence, they almost just went straight from like concept drawing to animation because they could, again, just do whatever they wanted in that scene. So I found that interesting.
Yeah, interesting there. So, and this might actually be all a part of that is, at this point, this is 2017, 11 years after the original Cars. And, photorealism in these movies is at a point where it can be done, basically, especially at Pixar. But a term that they kind of used to guide the production of this movie is art-directed realism. And that might have had something to do with some of the designs that we're getting with the Crazy 8 stuff. Of like now they're finally free to do these cars that aren't part of this mold or that don't fit this exact design.
Right.
But at the same time, and that's one thing that, I kept reading people in this movie working on were saying in one way or another is like now we can do all this stuff we have like the tech that we kind of wanted when we made Cars 1 to make it, to get it to the point where it can have this realistic look. But at the same time, we're making an animated movie about cars and, has to be directed as such. We're not trying to, portray real life as realistically as we can. But and that's something to me that actually stood out about Cars 3 and why I think 1 and 2 actually are visually like more appealing to me is that Cars 3, so much of it actually does look just like real footage. Like when the cars aren't on the screen, like when you just see like perhaps shots of the beach or the woods or whatever, like that to me looks way, way, way too realistic. And
I don't think it's that far from what we saw in Cars 1, though. Like, when we saw the shots of the landscape during Sally's, like, flashback, I don't know, that looked all very real. I think where Cars 3 differs from Cars 1 and 2, though, is that in Cars 1 and 2, the landscape was very Cars-oriented. Like the quote you said, where the guys like humans see themselves in nature, cars do too. Whereas in Cars 3, I don't think we get these big sweeping expanses of, like, tail fins sticking out of the landscape. And I think that's plays a bigger part in that realism than maybe the like colors or art design, in my opinion.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, I just do think it just looks more like watching real footage in general. There's a guy, I didn't write down his role, I just wrote down his name, but Michael Fong.
Okay, I've got his role here, actually. He's supervising technical director.
Okay, yeah. Very like not corporate, but very like, I don't know what you would call it, just very heavily named role. But so supervising technical director Michael Fong apparently said that photorealism wasn't what they were going for with this movie. So I feel maybe that behind the scenes there were some mixed messages or maybe not as clear a direction, because I think what we got is in many cases photorealism, not with the cars obviously, but with everything else, and not necessarily the quote-unquote art-directed realism.
Right.
And I feel like, maybe I'm just making this up, but I feel like that term art-directed realism was more used to describe the cinematography of the movie than anything else.
Yeah, I think so. Fong has a quote that I liked where he said most of his time is spent breaking physics because he needs to, like, is this too reflective? Is this too shiny? Does the lighting look right? So that was a lot of, like, his job.
Yeah, I guess that's the thing, too, of, like, you can make it as realistic as possible, but then if there's, like, a reflective surface that shines a light into the audience's eyes and blinds them, like, is that going to be part of the movie? Probably not.
Yeah, apparently the trickiest part in terms of lighting in the whole movie was, like, the Rusty's Racing Center, because it was all glass lit up by the sky. So having a building that's made of glass lit by natural light was very difficult for them to, like, realize in a way that looked good. I had no idea, like, how much the lighting designer, like, how much work lighting designers did on animated movies until very recently. A lighting designer for the recently for us released animated movie, but probably a while ago now, when you listen to this, Spies in Disguise, the Blue Sky animated picture with Will Smith who gets turned into a bird. Anyway, one of the lighting directors for that released some comparison shots of like before the lighting team did anything and then after. And there's some comparison shots for Cars 3 in this article, which is why I thought of this, because in this article that I was reading, they've got like one frame of the movie that they show like from the earliest concept art stage all the way through to the finished product, and there's in between there's a shot where like there's no lighting done at all, and then there's the lighting, and it's very impressive.
Yeah, one thing that they actually really focused on, I can't believe I remember this, because again, I don't know the technical details of really much of this at all. Something they focused on with Cars 1, and were actually able to expand greatly, I think, in Cars 3, is something called occlusion, which is part of the lighting process, which, again, don't know too much about it, but basically the way I read it explained is like if you're wearing a shirt and there's a wrinkle in the shirt and the wrinkle is in shadow but the rest of the shirt is not, type thing, because the light is hitting it in that way, that it's like that. That's occlusion, or kind of what that means in a 3D animated movie.
Yeah. I think it comes from the word ocular, but
I don't know. No idea.
Yeah, Cars 3.
Cars 3. I mean, there's really no need to say it again, but Cars is like a box office and merchandise juggernaut. There's just no stopping it.
I think for Cars 3, story-wise, I think they always knew from the beginning they wanted it to be very Doc-centric as well, where this memory of Doc is what's driving Lightning in this movie.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say, like, if you remember back to, like, Ocean's 11, 12, 13, I forget who it was, but someone was like, Ocean's 13 is the sequel that people wanted and we should have given them after Ocean's 11.
It kind of feels that way for this as well.
Yeah. Except this time I actually agree that the middle one is not as great, even though Ocean's 12 is the best Ocean's movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good segue into like how this works as a trilogy, actually. And on that topic, I think 1 and 3 like work really well together as like a continuing story about Lightning McQueen. The first one, he's a young, cocky racer who learns to be humble, basically, and then the second one is kind of the end of his racing career, where he learns that he doesn't have to stop being involved in the racing world just because now he's older and not as fast anymore. He can continue on by basically continuing the cycle that Doc was continuing with him, where Doc was his mentor and taught him everything, and now he can continue that by teaching Cruz.
Right. To that end, like I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I think it actually does somewhat work pretty well as a trilogy, because you don't just go straight from Lightning McQueen being like the best racer ever to like being past his prime. You do have that middle section where you kind of see him. He's not the focus of the movie, but he's participating in races. He's in his prime at that time.
Yeah, I think to that extent, I agree. I think where it breaks down is the fact that Mater is the main character of Cars 2 and not Lightning.
Right.
Because it feels like Lightning is just kind of a side stop in that story. It almost feels like they were going for the interesting inversion of characters, where the sidekick becomes the hero and the hero becomes the sidekick, which has been done successfully before.
But not with Mater.
I think because Mater is, in my opinion, the reason why it doesn't work is because we don't actually get any backstory to Mater that makes us care about his character. Even with Sally in Cars 1, we get this story that she was a lawyer in LA for many years, and then she like got tired of that life and just decided to drive out of town, and that's how she ended up in Radiator Springs.
Right.
Same with Doc. We get the story about how he crashed and he ended up in Radiator Springs. Lizzie's been there since the town was founded. Flo Ramon, doesn't matter. Millard and Fillmore, though. Fillmore and Sarge, we have like we have this fun banter between the two. We don't know much about their story, but then again, they're like not really main characters. And then Mater, who is now a main character, what do we know about Mater? He's a tow truck,
and I mean,
and he can drive backwards. Well,
from that perspective, like, what can you even like really do with Mater and putting him in this sort of spy storyline while simultaneously doing that? And I think that's kind of where they shot themselves in the foot, maybe.
Yeah, because even like Finn McMissile and Holly Shiftwell, we've got these stories because Holly's like, she's an up-and-coming person in the spy organization. She's, she's kind of the next generation that Finn is almost mentoring. which is why maybe I think that the movie would have worked better if Finn was the main character, because you'd have this kind of cycle between all three movies with Doc mentoring Lightning, Finn mentoring Holly, and then Lightning mentoring Cruz in the final movie.
Yeah, that I think definitely could have worked. And let's just not also gloss over the fact that Mater is just annoying. He's just grating. It's just...
Well, he's okay in small dosages like he is in Cars 1. Because that's the thing, in Cars 1, he is the comedic relief. In Cars 1, he's basically just another member of the town. Everybody in the town, I think, serves as, in some scene, at least once, as comedic relief.
Yeah. Well, he's also sort of like the quote-unquote fool archetype who, like, he's the silliest, he's the portrayed as the least intelligent, but he's the one who actually, like, really knows what's up, and it's Lightning who has to learn from him.
Mm-hmm. And also, in my opinion, part of the reason why Cars 2 just kind of feels like the black sheep is because it almost feels like the message of Cars 2 is almost an antithesis to Cars 1. Cars 1, Lightning is very arrogant and egotistical and full of himself. And in Cars 1, by going through Radiator Springs, he learns to be humble and that friendship is more important than winning and being a good person. But Mater is like, maybe he's just too dumb to realize this, but he's like, he's being insensitive about other people's cultures, just generally being a dick.
Yeah.
He basically thinks he's entitled to whatever he wants, very similarly to how Lightning acted in the first movie, except I guess because he cracks jokes, people don't really notice it as much.
Well, that too is weird because that's not who he was, or that's not who I felt he was in Cars 1, even.
Yeah. But then, like, at the end of the movie, the message of Cars 2, Lightning is like, no, be yourself. Like, you shouldn't have to change to make other people happy. Whereas in Cars 1, it was like, Lightning is a dick to everyone, and he should learn to be a better person, not just for everyone's benefit, but also for his own. To me, they feel very antithetical to each other.
Yeah.
So, anyway, those are my thoughts on the Cars masterpieces. Like I said, I'm starting to think that Cars 3 might be my favorite of the three. Like, looking back, I don't know. Maybe because I've seen Cars 1 so many times and not Cars 3.
Cars 1 is definitely my favorite, just looking back. I think Radiator Springs and the whole story behind that is definitely a part of it. Because it's Lightning's story. It's Radiator Springs' story as much as it is Lightning's story, I think.
That's true, yeah.
And Cars 3 didn't really have that going for it.
Cars 3 was, I think, Doc's story as much as Lightning's story. There wasn't like a location in the story that was predominant, I guess.
Yeah. As for the expanded universe of Cars...
There's a lot!
Well, there's the merchandise, obviously, the toys, the, whatever. You might have stickers. Well,
there was also, between Cars 1 and 2, Mater's Tall Tales. Cars Tunes, Mater's Tall Tales. And they were just Mater telling these stories about how he was like a famous rock star or a famous daredevil.
These lies.
Well, that's the thing about all of them, is that they're obviously tall tales. It's like, yeah, because he's always like, Lightning McQueen always halfway through will be like, that didn't happen, and Mater will go, yeah, it did, you was there. And then it would cut back to the story, and all of a sudden Lightning's in the story now. And like for the whole thing, you're always like, oh yeah, this is obviously a joke, haha. And then in the final, usually like 30 seconds of the clip, something will happen that'll imply it might have actually happened and that Mater wasn't lying. Like in the Daredevil one, Mia and Tia are like his biggest fans, and then in the final like 30 seconds, I think they drive by like dressed in their Daredevil supporting attire and go, hey Mater the Greater. Like, oh.
So they really should have done with Cars 2 is like at the end just cut to Mater saying like, and that's what I did last weekend.
And Lightning just rolling and be like, no it wasn't. Smash cut to credits. There's also a video game that I used to play a lot.
Oh, wow.
For the first movie that doesn't follow the plot of the first movie at all. It's just you basically play as Lightning McQueen and drive around. I think it's set like after the first movie, actually, when Radiator Springs is back on the map.
Wow, they're really like getting into the lore and storyline of Cars here with this expanded universe story. Yeah. But there's a lot that were probably
there are other Cars tunes that aren't Mater's Tall Tales. There's one where like some racers from Southern America come up to race against Lightning McQueen, and Mater gives them directions, and then they forget them and they turn like right or something, or instead of left they drive through like the worst possible track. Then they come back and then they're like, just kidding, Lightning McQueen is the best racer in the world.
I'm sure there are books of this as well. I'm sure it was novelized, into a junior novel or whatever.
I'd be extremely surprised if it wasn't.
And I'm sure there are also other stories done as books, whether those are kids' chapter books or picture
Lego
books.
sets. There were Lego sets.
Oh, wow.
There was a Cars 2 Monopoly, which I was gifted for my birthday that year.
Wow.
So,
interesting.
I
bet Radiator Springs was Boardwalk.
I don't remember, but I do remember that the board was a circle, and it was designed more for kids than adults, so it was a little smaller. And instead of rolling a dice, there was I just realized that it's almost like a roulette wheel that you spin Lightning McQueen around the outside of the board, and he kind of races around the circle and he stops on a number.
Huh.
Pretty sure I've got it somewhere.
Yeah, interesting. Maybe if we were still doing the .5s, we would
play
Cars
around. 2 Monopoly.
Take longer than watching all 3 cars back to back, probably.
But yeah, merchandising juggernaut.
Yeah.
I wasn't lying when they said it was a license to print money. But yeah, that's Cars. So, if you would like to email us, you can reach us at thedoctor@decorativvegetable.com. Questions, comments, concerns, angry rants, love letters, your thoughts on Cars. You can find us on YouTube at Decorative Vegetable. That's on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify, all at Triple Play. Be sure to leave a rating if you like the show.
Check us out on Facebook, Trust Your Doctor. Like us on Facebook. Also check us out on Twitter at TYD Podcast and follow us on Twitter. And next time we're going to be watching Triple X. But until then, the end.